Hello.
Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to like an ever exciting coffee chat. We're particularly excited for this one. This has been in the pipeline for a minute, and we're so excited to have Tiffany here. And so, because this is in fact a coffee chat, Mackenzie, do you have a beverage choice that you brought, or a beverage that you're dreaming of? Oh, look at you!
Water. My emotional support water bottle.
Yes, I have water in this mug because for some reason I'm putting all of my beverages in mugs now. It must be like a fall thing. I don't know. I've decided to accept it. It's very much a
What
vibe.
can I say? So, Kyra, what is our theme of the day?
So our theme of the day is setting writing goals. Because honestly, I don't know if y'all know about this, but NaNoWriMo is just around the corner and people are very much in writing goals mindset. Frankly, it's something that's applicable for us as writers all year round. But we might as well embrace the NaNoWriMo season in talking about writing goals more explicitly. And we have an incredible author who's here to give us some more insight on that. So without further ado, dramatic drum roll, please. Welcome, Tiffany.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. How are you?
I am doing well. It feels like it's eternally Wednesday to me, but other than that, I'm doing well.
That is the most
Tiffany,
relatable content.
we are so excited to have you here, and we would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell them what you write. Tell them why you nano. Tell them about yourself. Whatever you feel like sharing.
All right, so I am Tiffany. I am a speculative fiction writer. And by that, I mean I really like horror. I really like experimental stuff where I get to really play with the form of writing. I don't know if anyone's heard of House of Leaves, but I love the fact that part of the horror of House of Leaves is the book itself. Like just having it and interacting with it, even outside of reading it, is like part of the horror. And that's the kind of thing that I'm into as a writer. And in terms of NaNoWriMo, I have been a long time NaNoWriMo fan. I mean, I've been involved since the sixth grade. And for reference, I'm 30. So
Oh,
Nano's been around a long time.
That's awesome.
yes.
So thank you so much for that context. I was particularly excited to have you on on the coffee chat because I'm a fellow speculative fiction writer. So I'm just like geeking out over your work. And so and to get
The
on with our
alignment.
huh?
The
It's yes,
alignment.
we love alignment around here. It's one of our favorite words. But to just sort of launch into our discussion here today, especially since you just talked about your passion for nano as a participant, how can NaNoWriMo, especially since our talk is about setting writing goals, how can NaNoWriMo help authors shape their writing goals? How did you find it helpful, for example?
Um, so my thing that I really, really love about NaNoWriMo in particular is that it has such community love for writers all over. When I first discovered it in the seventh grade or the sixth grade, I barely understood the full extent of what it was. All I know is that I was searching for what is a really good writing community where I can get help, where I can do writing sprints with people and meet writers and collaborate. And NaNoWriMo just came up for that reason. So it's like whether you're using NaNoWriMo kind of as a rebel in a way to set goals. And by that, I mean, you're kind of on the outskirts. You're not really involved heavily in their forums or their particular official events. Even just meeting writers casually and saying, hey, do you know about NaNoWriMo? It's like a really easy way to make writing friends because either they do know and you get to geek out and work on it together, or they don't know and you know if you talk about it, they'll want to talk about it. you know? And so NaNoWriMo, I think the really big appeal is that it just comes with such a big worldwide community. So NaNoWriMo stands for National Novel Writing Month. National would make you think it's only USA. Obviously, it has a really big following in the USA, but no, it is international. It's people all over the world. And knowing that you have other people who are as into writing as you are all over the world just plays such a like chef's kiss role in shaping your goals.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I just have a quick follow up question about the community piece. And there's another question we have planned on later on. But is there one moment in particular when you felt like you realized, holy smokes, like this is such an all-encompassing community, or like any like fun anecdotes from an interaction you've had with the writer?
Well, so back in the day, I say back in the day, but I remember like about a decade ago, I was all about the forums. I felt like I felt about forums the way that people on Tumblr feel about Tumblr. It was like my life. It was like my identity. And NaNoWriMo has such a cool, lively forum that, all year round you can use it. But in November and October in particular, it just comes alive. And back in my forum days, there were threads I just lived in. For instance, the adoption forum. I love that thread. I would spend hours just reading through it. So the adoption forum over on NaNoWriMo is where writers could be like, I have this really cool idea. I can't give it justice. I don't know what to do with it. You take this idea. And just loads of people would just throw in all these cool character concepts, ideas, settings, and then we could all just kind of brainstorm together and take that idea. And even if multiple people took that same idea and came up with a story from it, it would all be different. So there was such a really fun, I remember just having so much fun in the forums back when I was younger.
I
like that a lot. It's important to have a sounding board. Like we've discussed a number of times the importance of community, but like you painting that picture just right there, like having other people to talk about your work with is so important to, setting and achieving your goals when it comes to writing a book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure.
Kyra, you had something you wanted to add?
I was just saying the most wholesome content, like the very idea of NaNoWriMo, to Mackenzie's point, being a sounding board, and not just that, being a place where ideas are actively exchanged, because, out in the world, people are like hypersensitive about intellectual property. So for like in NaNoWriMo to be a space where people could exchange ideas in like a more accessible, Socratic, engaging, less judgmental
and for all
way.
ages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
It's like it's hope. It's awe-inspiring, really.
Yes,
it's a safe place.
Exactly. And something important I want to say about that is that part of the reason why it was so important that kept me wanting to be a writer even way past the 6th grade was that I felt like when I announced in the 6th grade, I want to be a writer, it was kind of like, oh, that's so cute. But I was like serious, and it felt like no one was taking me seriously. And when I got on NaNoWriMo, it was like I was immediately taken seriously.
Yeah,
I said I wanted to be a writer. Yep. And people just went with it and took it on face value. And I love that.
Yeah. Keeping with the NaNoWriMo theme before we get digging our heels deeper into like writing goals. Why is Preptober, cute little wordplay we love, by the way, why is Preptober an important part of NaNoWriMo?
So here's a really fun fact about NaNoWriMo HQ official stuff versus like the fact that NaNoWriMo is like its own community that has its own liveliness even outside of NaNoWriMo HQ. It's kind of like how a writer writes a book and they think the world's going to take it one way, but then the world takes it and does its own thing with it. So within NaNoWriMo HQ, Preptober actually starts in September, and it's actually not even normally called Preptober. It's just called Nano Prep. And
prep as long as you want, man. A month is sometimes not enough.
Yeah, Preptober just
most of the time not enough.
Yeah, Preptober just sounds really cool and rolls off the tongue, but I actually don't even think that's HQ official. I think that the community just came up with that. It's such an important part for multiple reasons. First, it gets you, rightfully hyped for November. It gives you kind of like a countdown time to keep yourself like it's getting closer. But on the other end, it's important because it helps prepare you. It helps prepare you. It gives you time and space to not only be like outlining your novel or ideating or brainstorming, whatever works best for you. And not just helps to prep your work, it helps you to prep your community. For instance, like NaNoWriMo's website has a lot of resources to help you with time management. So you can get your office ready. You can come up with fun things to tell your family and friends so they don't bother you and they take you seriously when you're doing your word sprints and your writing. It just gives you a holistic way to come into NaNoWriMo day one not freaking out. Because let's be clear, 50,000 words in a month is hard. And it coming into that on day one with everything plotted out, you know, like your story's ready to go, you're emotionally ready, your space is ready, you have a community, you have an accountability buddy. Coming on day one with all of that just makes it start so much a little bit more serene than had you just started on day one with absolutely nothing prepped.
That seems like an impossible monumental task. I mean, like writing a book, we already know is not easy. Concept of writing a book in a month sounds crazy, but what sounds crazier is trying to do that without preparing anything at all.
Yeah.
Just pull up.
It's been done.
Words on a page. It's been done.
But I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh, it just sounds stressful. I mean, something that really stood out to me in your answer just then was the phrase, whatever works best for you, and having a holistic approach in preparing for a NaNoWriMo. And in that same vein, depending on whether an author has done NaNoWriMo a bunch of times, or this is their first time ever trying it, or really, even outside of NaNoWriMo specifically, like the period, just in their writing process in general, if somebody feels like they might need to make a change or just press into what they're already doing, what types of questions should writers ask themselves to evaluate current approaches to drafting? How do they know whether or not what they're doing is working?
I've noticed, so like NaNoWriMo has a large variety of pep talks where they partner with a lot of authors to give advice on questions like this. And I've noticed in looking at the materials that NaNoWriMo is really leaning out of like prescriptive advice and leaning more into descriptive. So I guess to really explain what I mean there, prescriptive writing advice suggests that there is one way to do it across all cultures, across genders, like there's one way, monolithic, and this is the advice. That is not good. Everybody is different. And NaNoWriMo's big mission is that your story matters, you know, in the way that works best for you. And so I guess connecting this question to what I just said, first, I think writers should ask themselves if their method of drafting is something that they think they have to do that they actually don't have to do. Like they think, oh, I read that some writer said that they do this, which means that's the only way. So now I'm doing that, and it's kind of feeling off. It's kind of feeling wrong. The problem with that is that you think, well, this great writer is doing it, and if I do it and it's not working, clearly that just means I'm a bad writer. And then that scares people off. You know, part of the spirit of NaNoWriMo is that it is about kind of having fun. Even though there's a lot of material to prep you for it, it really is kind of chaotic in nature on purpose, you know, so that you can just get the words out. A lot of things you can really worry about that people worry about in drafting could just be worried about in revisions. Like, you know, just get the words on paper, you know. So basically ask yourself if you're doing something because you've been told to do it and not because it actually feels good to you. And if it doesn't feel good to you, well, then feel free to either get out there and look at some other methods and experiment with those, or just throw it all out the window and just do whatever works for you. You know, even if it's like, it seems crazy that this works for me. But when I used to draft, when I was a kid, when I first started NaNoWriMo in the 6th grade, I would just write whatever paragraphs I felt good about that made me excited. And it would just be like this chaotic, non-linear mess. And at the end, I would like have all these arrows connecting the order it actually goes in. But I wrote the stuff that I was excited about first, regardless of if the order was correct or if it even made any sense, you know? So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I mean, we can't all be Stephen King and sit down and write 500 words a day. But see, here's the thing is he also writes books that are about this thick, like the size of my head. And not all writers decide to go for that kind of length.
Right.
Just a thought.
I do have a quick follow-up question to that, because I really appreciate how you followed up with answering the question and also adding your own personal experience. So you just said that within the NaNoWriMo community, and perhaps in your writing life in general, there are writers who come in and give, like, maybe not necessarily advice, but windows into their own experience. I guess the question sort of becomes, when does an author stop learning about writing, and when do they actually start writing? Like, at what point is it ever possible to read too much about something? Or, like, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yes,
you
yes.
overthink the craft, I guess.
I love this question. So interestingly, I don't know if you two know this or if people watching know this, but NaNoWriMo has a podcast, and I listened to their podcast episode recently, and the author they were talking to had mentioned that they were like, I think there's too many training materials and that it ruins writing for writers. And they were talking about that. So it has been a topic that's been heavy on my brain. I wholeheartedly do believe that writing tools can be used as a means of procrastination. You know, like sometimes it feels like I'm reading these because it makes me feel like I'm doing a writerly thing that's not actually the writing, and I feel good about it. It's busy work, but you know, I don't really need to know it. And that author in that podcast interview was suggesting that honestly, the first draft is just about getting the story out. One of my favorite quotes ever is from Neil Gaiman. He's like, you write the story for you. And in that case, you just writing a story for you, honestly, just thinking about all the training gets in the way of the story that you're often trying to tell. Because then what ends up happening is that you're writing and you're in your creative zone, and then suddenly you get out of it. You're thinking so and so in this text said that this needs to happen in this scene, and now you're thinking with an editorial mind when you should be writing with your creative mind. You know, and I used to be a copy editor. I used to be a developmental editor. I was that for about 11 or so years. So I've worked for publishing houses. So yeah, it's important for me as a writer to differentiate that mode. So yes, I do think there's a such thing as studying too much, especially because in my mind now, I'd rather put all that on hold until the editing phase and to just be creative with reckless abandon now.
I just needed to absorb that because that was really helpful. I am one of those people who like hyper studies, and I'm like, oh yes, all of this world building, and then I'm like, oh wait, when I actually start writing, like a third of the time I spent thinking I had to prepare was unnecessary because I was just procrastinating and facing imposter syndrome. So that was very helpful.
Yes. Okay, so this next question that we have for you might feel a little bit controversial, but answer it as you will. In an individual writing session, is it better? I mean, we have just talked about do what works for you, but I would love to hear your thoughts. Is it better to have a word count goal or a content/scene completion goal?
So my answer to this will not be a surprise to anybody. Of course, my answer to that is it really is what matters best to you. I've experimented with all of it, but I think from personal experience, a content scene completion goal just makes a lot more sense because word count goals end up often being arbitrary and something that only matters in the editorial stages. So really the only, I guess, word count, like NaNoWriMo is about 50,000 words. That's the number that was chosen. So that's why it's a word count goal. But NaNoWriMo actually has this really handy graphic that's like, you don't want to do words. Let's say you're here actually revising is for NaNoWriMo instead of writing. They have a handy sheet that just like changes scenes or pages to the word count so that you can do it on the website because you don't have that capability. But I think outside of NaNoWriMo, this word count thing only matters if you are selling it to a traditional publisher who will only take fiction, usually genre fiction, in a certain word count. So like if they're like, we want a fantasy and that baby's got to be meaty. It's got to be 150 to 200K. Then it matters. But outside of word count goals that you need for contest or for traditional press that has a word count goal in mind when they accept books, content and scene completions matter more. I think this question is also important depending on what process you're in. So whether you're writing the first draft versus the second draft versus the final draft or something. I think that to begin, I would care more about content and scene completion. And I'd only care about word count at the very, very end if I was going with the traditional press.
Yeah, word count ends up coming into play when we're talking like chapter length. But otherwise, if you just got one big, long working document and you don't focus too hard on chapters, you just keep on plugging in those scenes and they will be what they will be. And you can always go back and add more or take out stuff. And it's the beauty of the first draft.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, I know, because again, this is all a matter of whatever ultimately works for you. Because I remember one time, one of our previous coffee chat guests mentioned that she would write I'm blanking on who it is, but she would write 2,000 words come hell or high water every single day. And no matter how long it took, she would write 2,000 words in a day, and then she would just stop. So it's like, I mean, again,
dedication.
And that's dedication for one. But it's also like, at the end of the day, like, I mean, full disclosure, I am team scene completion, because sometimes when your brain has a thing in it, you just want to put it down on the paper and then leave. Sometimes that thing might be 3,000 words because you can sit there and crank it out. But sometimes it's 200, and you're not putting too much pressure on yourself to like be.
I'm just picturing them reaching that word count and like in the middle of a sentence. And then, oh, nope. We're done for the day.
Bye. And then, no, exactly. Yeah. So that was super helpful because, again, not me overthinking things. Never me overthinking. Anyway. So in tandem with the next question that we have for you, Tiffany, we're actually going to open up the floodgates from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask a question of our incredible guests, do not hesitate to drop them inside of the chat. I always forget which way this camera goes. The chat over here. And so it's funny because we're opening up for questions in the community. Our next question is actually about, and you touched on this earlier, where do you enjoy engaging with the writing community most? And this could be within NaNoWriMo or just beyond. Like, where do you like to engage as a writer?
So I don't know if you've ever heard of a concept called, like, some people call it co-working, other people call it body doubling. My favorite way to engage with the writing community is to use groups or websites. Like, for instance, FocusMate is like a website that allows you to do 30-minute co-working or 50-minute co-working with people all around the world, and you can have groups. So I found a group on Facebook that uses FocusMate, and it's only writers. And whenever I am just like, so for me, I don't tend to, like, when I sit down, I tend to be like, I have an hour today available to write, and I'm going to sit here and write. Sometimes to make sure I don't get distracted with that, I will open up FocusMate and I'll see who's available in that hour I'm going to write. And we get on and we'll say, here's what I'm doing this whole day. At the end, we're supposed to talk about it, and you have to sit there. You can't like get up and do other stuff. And usually you're on camera, and it's just like an accountability setup. And then at the end, you get to share with them how many words you wrote, what you were excited about, how much you got done. So that helps me with accountability. And there are loads of websites and opportunities like this. There's something on meetup.com I found called Just Shut Up and Write, where it's a lot of people in a big group, because FocusMate is just like one-on-one. Shut Up and Write is like a gigantic group of people. And, you shut up and you write. You say what your goals are in the chat, and then you get together at the end when the countdown is up and you talk about what you got done. That kind of writing community is extremely helpful for me. And like I mentioned in the past, it used to be forums. I don't know why I just have fallen off. I don't know if I just grew out of it, which I know sounds crazy because, like, it's not like forums is something that's like a kid thing. But I was just so on them all the time that I think I literally just burnt out on forums. But for me, forums used to be really, really cool. I used to be in chat boxes for writers a lot. So yeah, I think that pretty much answers it. And it's kind of confusing for me because each writing process has different protocols in my mind. So like, for instance, when I talk about even getting on FocusMate, when I'm writing the first draft, I do the Neil Gaiman method. Neil Gaiman is like, bore yourself. You're so bored that you either write or you do nothing. So like, when I'm writing the first draft, technology is not in the room with me at all. I'm in a boring room staring at a white wall where I have nothing better to do but write. But then in the second draft, that's when I start thinking about community. Sometimes in the first draft, community just ends up being a distraction for me, and then I end up not writing. So
vibes. Yeah, it's funny because Mackenzie and I are in like a writing group too, and it's like sometimes it's kind of like straddling that line between we gotta write, but also we're all friends, so it's that facts.
Oh, Mackenzie, I think
you're on mute.
Oops. I totally agree, is what I was saying. And on the flip side of that, all in the same vein, is why is it important for authors to pursue external accountability measures when writing? Because I agree with you. A good chunk of the writing is the sitting in a corner, focusing only on yourself and your book. But at the same time, we all know too well that like no one writes or finishes a book alone.
Yes. I was saying, oh, wow, there, because how effortlessly I went into that next question without even realizing it. But a lot of writers tend to think there's this image of like the starved, suffering, lonely writer who exists in a vacuum. But something really cool is that when you think about all the writers that we really love the most, or like the people that we were forced to study in school, when you really like study their personal lives, you'll realize that they were all friends. Like, for instance, the author of Narnia was close friends with the author of with Tolkien, the author of Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. So they would often, like, after writing sessions, would go meet up in a bar or a restaurant and chat and ideate and just, you know, so like these writers that we love often had other writer friends who they regularly met with to discuss their writing wins, their writing losses. And I think it's important for authors to pursue external accountability, not just because, yes, it is a really good way of getting work done, but and you know, making sure that someone else can hold you accountable just outside of yourself. But community does matter in writing. And also I think that sometimes external accountability helps with even ideation, helps with brainstorming, helps with, you know, keeping your brain fresh sometimes too. So yeah, I think that you shouldn't feel like you need to be a lonely, suffering author to be an author, and to keep in mind that many of your favorites have author friends. And in fact, your favorites are probably all author friends. So, you know, yeah.
That's a very good point. I mean, to that end, as a quick example, there are, so on Instagram, for some reason, I'm just really interested in into when I start reading books, like for some reason they all come out at like the same time. So for example, The Undone Truth of Us by Brittany S. Lewis, she's really good friends with Tiffany D. Jackson, and they have like displays of like Black Girl Magic all books all next to each other on the same shelf. And I'm like, see, we love to see this. So it's like, again, like seeing pockets of community form, and like Ayana Gray with, that's what I say, right? For Beast of Prey. So these are just like side examples of like actual books where I've seen this happen. But you're right, like authors do create community, and they like share in each other's successes, which like makes, it's weird that the starving artist image still is so prominent in our minds. It actually sounds kind of awful. And I'm glad we don't actually.
Someone's doing, our writer PR team's not doing us any favors.
But truly not. Like, that sounds terrible. I'm glad that even this conversation is proof that that's not a thing, really. Like, we're all of this together.
Yes.
Yeah, sounds like some propaganda to try to discourage children from becoming writers. You know what I mean? You're not going to make any money, and you're going to be sad and starving.
And
Wrong.
your only company will be your imagination. Yeah. Anyway.
Oh darn.
I mean, but speaking of company, we have had some pretty interesting engagements in the chat. And for those of you who are live watching with us, if you have any further questions before our final official question for Tiffany, don't hesitate to drop that. But we want to shout out a couple of your really interesting comments so far. So Montgomery Harris shared that they have been participating in Rimo and completed NaNoWriMo from 2016 to 2020. So they know that's pretty awesome. And our dearest colleague Zara Miller shared a couple of things, like when we were talking about different approaches to storytelling and different approaches to writing. I cannot pronounce that. Vonnegut-esque.
Vonnegut-esque. I think is the word we've made up here.
Yes, Vonnegut-esque non-linear storytelling any day, which is awesome. And when you were talking about Neil Gaiman, the legend himself, Neil is the king of storytelling, honestly. And yeah, I would have to concur.
Yeah, he's my spirit animal. I want to be Neil Gaiman when I grow up so bad.
It's so cool. And the fact that his writing has access to so many different audiences. This is kind of a tangent, but I profoundly admire authors who have a very clear voice, but they're not afraid of conveying that voice to very different audiences. And I feel like that's a dream that I have in my career. Like, maybe, experimenting with genre to an extent, but really being like, Neil Gaiman made speculative fiction accessible for a variety of ages, And that's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh, look, Zara followed it up.
We're writing our own dictionary definitions now.
No, that's awesome. That's so cute. Wait, how do you pronounce it? Vonnegut-esque? Vonnegut-esque. We love to see it. We love to see it.
Gosh, imagine getting that in the spelling bee.
And be like, I'm crying. And so in the last official question that we have for you is, do you have any final words of wisdom? Parting words?
Let me see. Gosh, it's like I'm just like, there's so many things that are coming into my brain, and let me see, because
for aspiring writers,
particularly for aspiring writers who want to get started,
aspiring authors, people who are getting hyped for Nano.
Okay, so that helps narrow it down a little bit, because I'm just like, there are so many things I can say for like different parts of the editing process or writing process. Honestly, this is going to sound a little cheesy, a little obvious, but my word of wisdom is honestly to just get started, to just start writing.
Just do it.
And yes, exactly what I was thinking. But do it in the way that, like, for instance, I think that being able to sit down and crank out 2,000, 3,000 words is in a way kind of a privilege, because that means that you have someone else who, depending on your life situation, that means maybe you don't have kids, or maybe you don't have a chronic illness, or maybe you don't have a 9-to-5. That means that maybe you can focus on that because you don't have other things to take your time. For NaNoWriMo, even though it's 50,000 words in a month, the org is leading a lot out of feeling like you need to write that. If you need to only write 1,000 words this whole month, then do that. It's still greater than nothing. If you can only write a sentence a day, then do that. If you want to spend this NaNoWriMo not writing the actual book, but exploring your characters by writing a bunch of backstories about them, just to see what their stories were like before you wrote the book, and you just want to write this random short story collection that has nothing to do with seeing the light of day, that's just for you to get to know your characters, do that. Heck, I'm using NaNoWriMo not even really to write the story. I feel a lot of pressure about writing the story, the big story during NaNoWriMo. I like to use that time to write around the story, to write stories about the world my story is going to be in, to write stories about my villain to see why did he actually or she become the villain in the first place. I like to write around, or sometimes I like to work on business stuff, like doing all my copy for the next month for social media. You know, like, you do not see NaNoWriMo as a prescriptive thing to force you into anything. Do what you need to do. A sentence a day, world building, side stories, the big story. It doesn't matter. Just do what makes you happy and have fun.
That is fantastic advice. Thank you so much for your time today, Tiffany. Thank you for your wonderful answers and your words of wisdom.
You're welcome.
You're the coolest.
Thank you.
Well, Tiffany, that is all the questions we have for you today, and we will send you off here to enjoy the rest of your day.
Yes,
thank you again.
You're awesome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for asking great questions.
Bye, Tiffany.
Bye.
Well, that was iconic. I learned so much.
Incredible.
So if you guys have any, first of all, we hope that you enjoyed that, because we found it enjoyable. That was awesome. But if you have any further questions, if there's a topic that you particularly want to hear from us, if there's a particular person you want us to bring onto the coffee chats, let us know. Suggest a topic in the comment section below. We do read them. They do, in fact, inspire us. So that's awesome. Yes. So do not hesitate to suggest a topic. And as you see at the bottom of your screen, if you want to reach out to us with your recommendations, instead of dropping in down there in YouTube, you can reach out to us on our Instagram handles. We also have included some of the Instagram handles of our colleagues in the description box below as well.
All right, everyone. Happy writing.
Happy writing. Like and subscribe to this channel.